One of the weirdest things for me when I go back to the movies is the revelation that Jean is a doctor here. Dr. Jean Grey. Dr. Grey. This would, in ways, be incorporated into the comics, or I've seen it kind of come up sorta at certain moments. There have been versions of Jean who uses her psionic powers to basically learn how to be a medical doctor and then kind of like use those skills to treat others, thereby kind of becoming a doctor herself, although not, you know, formally. However, for the most part, this is not a part of Jean's canonical origins. At least not on Earth 616 it isn't. So it's always seemed weird to me in the movies that Jean just was going to be a doctor, that she was like, that's what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna be a doctor. I would say it's pretty different from Jean's focus in the comics, which tends to be more, I guess, emotional as opposed to like scientific or medical, if anything. For the most part, Jean is seen as simply an empathetic hero who works alongside the X-Men. That being said, I guess she could also have other pursuits, but in a way she feels like she's kind of filling in for the roles of Charles somewhat in the movies here, by being the person to like explain what mutants are from a genetic and evolutionary standpoint, which usually tends to be what Charles does in the comics. Something we've seen him do before anyways, since he's literally a man who is usually studied genetics, specializing in mutant genetics, so yeah. You know something is really weird when I'm struggling to even find a clip of it to prove that I wasn't crazy in imagining it in terms of its existence. However, while I wasn't able to find the exact clip, I was able to find a lot of people on the internet who were able to back me up with their memories of this weird mutant power. So yay, thank you the internet. And next to we meet Jones, whose mutant power is seemingly to change the channel by blinking. Yep, I mean I know there are a lot of weird mutant powers out there, but this feels weird even for mutants. Grant Morrison is often considered the writer most well known for going ham with weird mutants, so in this regard it could mean that the comics influenced us to get Jones, whose power could extend beyond changing the channel with blinks, but it's never really more clearly defined based on what we see of this mutant. I guess the difference is that in the comics our lovable weirdos like Glob Herman, Beak, or Eye-Boy tend to at least get some more development over time in regards to both their power sets and mutant abilities, and just who they are as people as well, I would say. Sadly, Jones did not get as much time as someone like Eye-Boy has. When I imagine Juggernaut in a film, I think Deadpool did the character more justice. Also fun to see that Ryan Reynolds was also the voice of Juggy in the films, kinda love it. In Deadpool 2, Juggernaut's helmet mostly obscures what appears to be a supersized, overly wide face. It feels as though Kane's power set modifies his look, making him a giant, strong man, as opposed to just, you know, someone who is granted super strength while remaining normal size because of his armor and because of Cyttorak and all that stuff. He is a beast in those films, made with the help of David Leitch CGI and being given a voice through Reynolds' portrayal of him. Whereas in the X-Men films he was played by, also I would say a badass, Vinnie Jones, but his appearance, costume, and stance just don't really sell us as much on the character. In fact, it kinda just makes Vinnie look ridiculous, which I also feel like is just silly because I do feel like Vinnie Jones could have been a good Juggernaut. Maybe that's a hot take, I don't know. Y'all can let me know in the comments if that's a hot take. Maybe one of the weirdest moments of all time from this series, this one comes to us from X-Men The Last Stand, and of course involves Juggernaut. Juggernaut already has been discussed. I mean, that costume is, like I said, it's a vibe for sure. But during X-Men The Last Stand, Juggernaut also decides to put on some attitude to match his look and menacing power set as well. At one point he says, in the vein of Britney Spears' "It's Britney bitch, don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut, bitch." I mean, if you are trying to intimidate people, Kane, I think there are just like better lines you could have gone with. I know Kane isn't always shown to be the brightest bulb in the bunch, both inside and outside of the comics, but like, we know what his name is. It's not, that part is not very intimidating. I mean, I guess his name is the Juggernaut, so I guess that sounds, I mean, no, it just doesn't. It really doesn't. This line is just pretty goofy, especially when we look back at it. It also just seems weirdly unnecessary as well, to be honest. Just overall. Not necessarily a moment in the movie, but let's talk for a moment about Bryan Singer, who all in all is quite a complex individual, to put it lightly. Bryan Singer has been considered downright dastardly by some and condemned for both his onset and his offset behavior. But at the same time, there are others who have worked with him, specifically some of the cast of the X-Men films, who also felt that he was actually an amazing director despite his flaws. Sure, he wasn't always prepared or on time, and he was known to behave inappropriately, but there are actors who still were impressed by the fact that even sometimes without like seemingly like being super prepared. He knew how to get his shots and get what he needed out of his actors, so he could just come to set and he would just like bing bang boom, get it done. In that regard, most of the cast found themselves actually impressed with his abilities as a director. But there is also something that exists separate from, I would say, his behavior. He was never a fan of the X-Men comics. What? Which is pretty wild to consider. But it makes sense when you take a look at the films. For Singer, the appeal for the X-Men films was actually in exploring the analogy between the mutants and real-world prejudice and discrimination that certain people and groups face. Found that fascinating, and that's basically why he was like, I definitely want to do this. It looks cool. I don't want to read these comics, but I do want to do this comic book superhero movie. This one is both great and also awkward. It happened in X-Men First Class, and while overall it's actually honestly a pretty fun time, it's also a pretty weird scene when you have the context of like the original Fox X-Men films, where Magneto and Professor X at that point are more seen as elderly men, you know? This is back when the two were recruiting, and it is under this guise that they go to an adult dance club together. It's here that they encounter Angel. No, not that Angel. This Angel seems to be more based on Angel Salvador, and yeah, it's pretty awkward. Also kind of odd when you consider that Angel Salvador is actually a newer mutant who meets Charles when he is much older in the comics, so also just kind of strange in terms of that. This is a comic book moment in the worst way, and by that I mean it feels like just lazy and bad writing. Now, this is not something comic books are known for per se. I'm not saying that comic book stuff is lazy and bad writing, because usually that's not the case, but it is something that some of the worst comic book moments typically exhibit, like this movie-based comic book moment, which as far as I know isn't actually based off of anything specific from the comics, other than that sometimes, yes, Wolverine does suffer from muddled or completely wiped memories, and yes, he has been shot before in the head and that has messed up his memories. Usually though his memories get messed up because he's in some kind of facility where they have that tech, or because of trauma that he suffered in his life. However, here Stryker isn't using any fancy machine, but instead he's just hoping that adamantium bullets are gonna do the job. Very bizarre. What's even more bizarre is that this is the intent here. It's just to wipe his mind. That's his intent. Because he's not sure if he can actually kill Logan. How did he even know that this would work? This all goes down, of course, in X-Men Origins Wolverine, because that is where that would go down, isn't it? This machine is admittedly pretty ridiculous when you think about it, but as with most things in the Fox movies, it's just really better if you just don't think about it too much, you know? The mutant conversion machine was something that Magneto created to turn others into mutants. I mean, it didn't work long term, but it did work in the short term. In the first X-Men film, he kidnaps Senator Kelly and uses the machine on him. The whole idea of how it works is kind of wonky and very like kind of comic book science-y, with it even being powered by Magneto's own powers, which produced a mutant creating radiation field. Magnets, everyone. What can't they do? Both in the comics and in the films, apparently. I mean, you know me, I love a good goofy magnet moment as much as the next person. I just talked about all the weird ways that Magneto uses magnets over on my personal channel, but going back to this film and thinking about this machine, it's just a bit much, even for me. I'm cool with Magneto having his magnetic personality even, but using his powers to harness what is a mutant radiation field is just a bit too much for me in my mind. What does that even mean?
It's been 6 years since Avengers Infinity War was released, and I'm still mad at Star-Lord. He blew it. He blew it all. We were all sitting there in the theater holding our breath watching Infinity War, watching the Avengers battle Thanos on his homeworld in Titan. Now at this point in the film, Mantis had Thanos under control. Everything was chill, the Avengers and the Guardians are working together in harmony, and they're so close to getting that gauntlet off Thanos' hand. The plan is working well, but who knows, maybe billions of lives won't be lost now, right? At this exact moment, Star-Lord learns that Thanos has killed Gamora, and his emotions overpower him. In a fit of rage and grief, he attacks Thanos, inadvertently breaking the group's hold on the Mad Titan and his Infinity Gauntlet. This rage-fueled attack allows Thanos to regain control, put the gauntlet back on, and then proceed to turn half of all the universe into dust. Yeah, I'm sure Tony and Natasha would have a few choice words for Star-Lord if they had the opportunity. Falcon and the Winter Soldier took a grounded approach in contrast to WandaVision within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This Disney Plus series centered on Sam Wilson's journey to becoming Captain America, marking the first time in the MCU that a character officially inherits the mantle. Sam's debut in the iconic suit and shield looks pretty spectacular in recent stills from Captain America: Brave New World. Subsequent Phase 4 projects continue this trend by transforming other MCU characters into legacy heroes, paving the way for a new roster of Avengers. Notable successors include Kate Bishop, Jane Foster, Shuri, and potentially T'Challa's son. I don't know what's going on with Jane anymore, but we'll see. In The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, a new team of superheroes is introduced to the MCU, the Thunderbolts. This team is quite distinct from the Avengers in their approach to heroism. Led by Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, the team begins to take shape with the recruitment of John Walker, who was later bestowed with the codename US Agent in Episode 5. He's like the new, scary Captain America. He's actually quite terrifying. The scene where he's going nuts with the shield, I'm honestly surprised that was allowed on Disney+. Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova joins the team in a post-credit scene from Black Widow, and further revelations from the official Thunderbolts movie lineup indicate that Val will also enlist Red Guardian and Taskmaster from Black Widow, as well as Bucky Barnes and Ghost from Ant-Man and the Wasp. That would be a pretty epic team. But what's gonna happen? What's next for the MCU? Where are they gonna fit in with this broad narrative? I have no idea anymore. This one was pretty confusing. WandaVision was the first Disney Plus series. It's also my personal favorite next to Loki Season 2, and not only experimented with this darker tone, but also introduced unexpected elements, and maybe some mutants. Evan Peters' appearance as Quicksilver practically broke the internet. I stood up off my couch. 27 years old, I stood up for a Disney show. What am I doing? Given his previous portrayal in Fox's X-Men franchise, fans couldn't wait to see what came next. Now, despite WandaVision revealing Peters' character to be a regular human named Ralph Boner, it did signal a groundbreaking moment as the first instant of a Marvel actor from another franchise being reintegrated into the MCU. Even if it was an absolute waste of Evan Peters as Quicksilver, it's still something. It started somewhere. Phase 4's post-credit sequences were quite intense. Almost like another movie, right after the movie we just watched. Back in the day, it used to say, "Thor will return." That's it, then we left and went home. In Phase 4 of the MCU, fans were introduced to a plethora of new characters. For example, in Eternals, 2 post-credit scenes unveiled Harry Styles as Thanos' brother, Eros, and Mahershala Ali's Blade. In Spider-Man No Way Home's post-credit scene, emerged Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock and Venom into the MCU. This is a huge, huge deal. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness introduced Charlize Theron's Clea, while Thor Love and Thunder introduced Brett Goldstein's Hercules. And we just met Mark Spector's third persona, Jake Lockley, for the first time. Will Deadpool and Wolverine reset the Marvel Universe and scrap all of these new introduced characters? After all, the van from Moon Knight was spotted on set of Deadpool and Wolverine. So who knows? Comment all your theories down below. And while you're here, you might as well subscribe to the Nerd Squad, and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Marvel updates. Now back to some Avengers drama. WandaVision ended with the introduction of, well, another Vision. Literally, another physical Vision. White Vision was engineered by SWORD as a weaponized iteration of the late synthezoid hero that we all know and love, Vision. He was tasked with confronting Scarlet Witch and Vision. White Vision engages in combat. Now, during their clash, Vision transfers his memories to the new White Vision, causing the latter to vanish. Now, initially, it was anticipated that White Vision would reappear in the Disney Plus series Vision Quest. However, Marvel's revised release strategy has cast doubt on this project's realization, leaving White Vision's destiny unresolved. Also, what an epic, quick character arc that was, right? White Vision's like, who am I? What's a ship? Anyways, see ya. Throughout the multiverse saga, a recurring theme has been the introduction of younger versions of well-known heroes, obviously hinting at the possibility of a Young Avengers film down the line. In the Marvels, Kamala Khan enlists Kate Bishop, and potential Young Avenger candidates have been hinted at across the MCU. However, Disney's revised mantle might complicate this plan, especially without stronger ties to the original Avengers franchise. Given the limited information on the lineup for Avengers 5 and Avengers Secret Wars, the likelihood of a third Young Avengers movie looks quite uncertain. That sucks. All that work to introduce them all and just nothing. Now they're like, hey, Deadpool 3, whatever, Wolverine's back. In the mid-credits scenes of Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Shang-Chi joins Wong, Carol Danvers, and Bruce Banner to discuss the ongoing danger posed by these mystical rings, hinting, of course, at a new villain. Will we ever see who the rings were communicating with? Hopefully, probably not. A sequel addressing this threat seems unlikely at this point. However, Marvel star Simu Liu took to social media last week to promise that a sequel is still in the works. Black Knight. No, I'm not talking about Martin Lawrence's Black Knight. That's an excellent movie, but this one's a little different. Eternals post-credit scene hinted at Dane Whitman's transformation into the Black Knight with the ebony sword. Now, with Eternals 2 probably not happening at this point in the Marvel Universe, his fate may remain unresolved, which sucks, because how exciting was that end credit scene? As a minor character, he's less of a focus in Marvel's new plans, but fear not, because there is a chance he could join the Defenders in a future team-up event or project, possibly including the Blade movie, but we'll see. That's never going to get on its feet at this point. Every time I hear about it, it's a new director, a new writer, a new Blade. What's happening? Is Wesley Snipes back? I heard he's back. What? While the Avengers get most of the credit for putting a stop to Thanos' mad plan to wipe out half of all life in the universe, we do have to look back and give credit to a small hero that is often forgotten. And no, I'm not talking about Ant-Man. I'm talking about a hero that kickstarted the events of Avengers Endgame. This rat. Scott Lang had been stuck in the MCU's quantum realm since the events of Ant-Man and the Wasp back in 2018. And Scott only returns because a rat inside Lewis's van, which contains the quantum realm connection that Scott uses, this rat ends up stepping on a button, and this button conveniently brings back Scott after being trapped for 5 years. Now allowing the Avengers to identify a path forward, or backwards. Time travel is so confusing. Thank you, Stuart Little, you literally saved the universe.
Let's look at an odd love story, The Island Lovers. Krakoa, now the safe space for mutants to exist and thrive, is technically a mutant themselves. Well, half a mutant. Akara was an ancient mutant that eventually grew into a massive island. Pretty soon, someone came by with the Twilight Sword and cut the island in half. But using that sword caused a portal to Amenth to open. Amenth is a world in another dimension, and this world is dark and full of bad things. One half went there, that half was later named Arakko, and the other half, Krakoa, stayed here on Earth. The two sides of this mutant were separated for a long time, growing on their own and becoming their own islands. In the era we are used to, Summoner was being sent on a mission to Earth from the demon planet, so he took a small part of Arakko, the Arak Coral, as his mode of transport. If all that wasn't enough, something truly unexpected happened when the Coral met Krakoa. They got together, presumably in a romantic sense if the dialogue from the X-Men present is anything to go off of. In the end, the actual Arakko Island wanted to stay as its own island, and it was just the Coral that got involved with the mutant safe haven.
Not only is this next moment in X-Men history centered around a surprise party, so surprise, but it also involves the most bizarre and unexpected turn of events. Professor X decided to throw a surprise party for Kitty Pryde and hired the most inappropriate clown, Obnoxio, for the party. In this first panel, we see Obnoxio smoking a cigar and thinking about how he's going to spend the pile of money the professor promised him. The even weirder part of the story is that while this crazy party is going down with this ridiculous clown, the X-Mansion is also at the same time infiltrated by a villainous mutant who can turn himself into ice cream. Yeah, and that's not even the weirdest thing about him. Appropriately, his name is Ice Cream, but it is not spelled like how you think. It's spelled like an eyeball and the shrieking sound that is referred to as a scream. What's more is no one seems to know that Obnoxio is even coming to this party. I guess it's like a super secret surprise. And Obnoxio also ends up in a ridiculous fight with the X-Men where he also surprisingly manages to hold his own pretty well.
I don't want that clown at my birthday party, but what I do want, genuine a history textbook from the Marvel Universe with all the changes Marvel characters have made to history, because Wolverine is everywhere. He is collecting major historical events like he is trying to fill out a bingo card. Today we are looking at the time he checked off the Valentine's Day Massacre. The year is 1929. Wolverine is established to be a smuggler for the Prohibition era and he has a girlfriend. He is also, of course, being pursued by Victor Creed, Sabretooth, when is he not? Wolverine heads out into Chicago, but when he gets back to his hotel, his girlfriend is there on the floor, lifeless. Wolverine thinks it was Capone who did it, Al Capone, because they are in Chicago. But Al Capone insists it wasn't him, and he gives Wolverine a paper with the location of the guy who did it. Guess what the location was? That's right, the garage for the Valentine's Day event. There were 8 men there in the Marvel Universe, not 7. Of course, Wolverine's healing factor saves him, and we find out that the reason Al Capone even came up with the Valentine's Day treat was because Sabretooth suggested it. Do the Wolverine writers just have a roulette wheel in their office with all the painful historical events on it, and whenever they need inspo on how to make Wolverine's backstory more tragic, they just write about whatever it lands on? I don't know. Wolverine at the Valentine's Day event and Sabretooth being the mastermind behind it is just something I never ever could have predicted.
Wolverine and Sabretooth both do have a surprising amount to do with history. I guess that's what happens when you get as old as they get to be. But we all know that Cyclops, aka Scott Summers, has always, as long as he's been around, which has been a lot less of time, had a thing for Jean. But when it comes to the classic X-Men team, he actually wasn't the only one. In fact, pretty much everyone was head over heels for Jean at one point, maybe except for Bobby, who back in the day, honestly, he did like to flirt, but mainly was really more in love with ice cream. Bobby was truly the youngest of the bunch, as is evident by his super obsession with ice cream. Both Angel and Beast also seem to hold a bit of a flame for the lone female member of the X-Men team, with Angel actually being pretty close at a few points to winning Jean's heart. But in one fateful panel, we'd even learn that Charles Xavier, yep, the professor, Jean's mentor and teacher, was also apparently in love with her. Maybe not as surprising at the time, but certainly not something you'd expect to look back on and see in retrospect if you are a fan of more modern comics or even stuff that was like the early 2000s, you know what I mean? Especially when we are later given the retconned origin of Professor X first meeting Jean when her powers first manifested as a child after the traumatic loss of her best friend Annie. Yeah, just makes it's weird.
Wolverine cheers for the Calgary Flames. I know, I can't believe it either. Alberta kids, we have 2 choices growing up, the Oilers or the Flames, and this Edmonton girl argues that he picked the wrong side, not to throw stones from a glass house. In Wolverine First Class 6, Wolverine is tasked with babysitting on the night of the 7th game in the Stanley Cup playoffs. He's not missing it for a single flamin' thing. He is also featured in another panel eating donuts off his claws, and in my world, they are from Timmy's. Wolverine rightly claims that it's his moral right as a Canadian to watch hockey when he wants. It's what he does best. The X-Men are truly in another universe because I don't think the Calgary Flames were in the Stanley Cup playoffs in 2008, the year this comic dropped, or the year before, or the year after. In my very intense research about why Wolverine might be a Calgary Flames fan and not a fan of a good team, one particular Reddit comment caught my eye, and it's about Wolverine's healing factor. See, his healing factor helps him come back from pretty much anything, even regenerating from just a single drop of him. This user commented, "I'm sure having the ability to almost instantly heal from any wound helps you when you're a Flames fan." Not to start a hockey war, but facts are facts. I know I'm about to get cooked in the comments section, I know that, sorry.
When Cassandra Nova was first introduced in the comics, she was considered to be quite a mysterious figure. And I think that's why there were a lot of folks out there who were surprised when we learned of her origin. Now, as cool of a character as I feel like she is, her origin sure is super weird and super hard if you're just explaining it to someone who doesn't read comics. And in that way, I guess it's pretty unexpected. Although, as a comic book fan, I guess I found it less surprising than maybe some other folks would because, well, comics. Cassandra Nova was initially believed to be this mutant-adjacent villain, yet kind of a very different being. She wasn't a human, but she wasn't exactly a mutant either, so what was she? Well, we later find out that she was in fact neither. She was a Mummadry, that's a thing. The evil twin sister of Charles Xavier, who was born without a body, and so replicated her brother's body kind of in the womb. As with all Mummadry, in regards to the Shi'ar's beliefs surrounding them, Mummadry are basically like our evil anti-selves that manifest when we're first born and we gotta fight them to be born. Charles sensed that Cassandra was bad, battled her and won in order to be born. But she was able to live on by sheer force, starting as a blob of cells in a sewer wall and eventually growing into the physical being that we'd all come to know. Seriously, that's her origin. Even more wild is the fact that this origin is actually unique to Cassandra. You see, not all Mummudrai can do this. She was only able to accomplish such a feat because of the genetic potential of her brother Charles. Even for a Mummudrai, it's weird, you know?
Everyone's favorite web-slinger was almost an X-Men. Spider-Man and the X-Men rarely team up, and X-Men 27 might explain why. Beast and Iceman finds Spider-Man to ask if he wants to join the team. Spider-Man turns them down because he already turned down the Avengers at that point, plus he's super busy and he believes he's destined to work alone. He was still in his emo teen era. Spider-Man swings away before the X-Men pair can argue further. Maybe we don't see Spidey with the X-Men all that much anymore because they're still hurting from this interaction.
I know I was certainly surprised by the ending to one of my favorite recent mutant team series, Hellions. In the final issue, issue number 18, the Hellions are forced to face the music after Orphan Maker is basically put on trial for breaking one of Krakoa's 3 governing laws. It's like the 3 things that they say on Krakoa, just don't do these things and you're cool. Ugh. As a result, Orphan Maker is sentenced to exile in the pit, and Nanny basically decides to go with him. It's all super heartbreaking. Thinking about it makes me want to cry. Now the other members of the team are basically forced to disband by the council. Now directionless, they return to life even more dejected than they were at the beginning of the series, with none of them really feeling at home any longer on the mutant island nation of Krakoa. For a series about found family and purpose, it honestly ends on a very tragic note.
A man in the X-Men universe just recently gave birth to a space station. I'm as shocked as you are. Nothing in my life could have prepared me to say that sentence or explain it. So at the Hellfire Gala, something that Amanda actually talked about in part 1, a lot happens. Explosions and fighting and a birth. Monarch has reality warping powers and he's known to be an Omega level mutant, so he used his powers to impregnate himself with the space station to keep it safe. The station was Peak 7, later called Keep, and the station was used as a means of communication between Krakoa and Arakko, the 2 mutant islands we actually covered at the beginning.
This moment is so strange. I literally reacted to my thought about what I was about to say and I was like, man, this is a really weird one. It's really that weird, guys. Hold my hand because it's gonna get weird. This moment is so strange that it needs to just be mentioned. It needs to be immortalized in this video, so here we go. At the beginning of Uncanny X-Men issue number 178, we see Professor X reminiscing on the first student to join his X-Men team, Scott Summers. Cyclops had recently left the team to settle down with his new wife, Madeline Pryor, who looks exactly like Jean. You see, Scott had considered that she actually might be the reincarnation of Jean, but don't worry, we later find out she was actually Jean's clone, created by Mr. Sinister using a spark from the Phoenix. Professor X is reading a letter he's received from Scott detailing the events of his newlywed life, and it includes a picture of Scott. But not just Scott, it's Scott and Maddie in bed together. What? Not only is this a weird thing to send your teacher slash kind of pseudo father figure, but it's also weird in the sense that it makes you wonder, who took that photo?
Superman and the country of the United States of America are the same thing. Not really, but Superman is like a mascot for American culture. His catchphrase was literally truth, justice, and the American way. Country boy, upstanding journalist, American icon. Q gasps when he renounced his American citizenship in 2011's Action Comics 900. The reason he did it was because he didn't want to be tied to the US anymore, but not for the reason you might think. So what happened is he flew to show support for a protest in another country. He was showing his support, Superman's support, but the government of that country thought he was acting on behalf of America and took his presence as a declaration of war, which was not Superman's intention at all, so he wanted to separate from his American status so he could stand up for what he believes in without causing an international incident. The good news for those that disliked this change, it didn't last long. The New 52 reboot happened the same year, that's a whole other can of worms, and it made Superman an American again. Batman The Dark Knight is an incredible movie. A cold take, I know. The scene where James Gordon was revealed to actually be alive, I think I lurched out of my seat when I first watched it. Gordon saves the mayor's life at the cost of his own. Well, but then after the epic car chase, ending with Joker standing over the beaten body of Batman, suddenly the Joker is pushed aside and it's, surprise, James, he's alive. That's cinema, that's art, and that is Oscar worthy. Also, there is a photo that is, I'm pretty sure from when they filmed this scene, of Heath Ledger's Joker skateboard flipping over Christian Bale's Batman, and it should be in the Louvre. Maybe the greatest underdog comeback story I have ever heard, ever read, Kite Man. This villain started out as a random joke character in the lore of Batman and has worked his way up to being a fan favorite that is now getting his own animated series that's inspirational. The character appeared in Harley Quinn, the animated series, and that's when his popularity really kicked off. Now his own show is set to premiere this year. He really is a character you have to love, goofball through and through. If you didn't catch it from his name, he fights with kite-themed items, and of course he flies around using a kite. I love the villains that pick something and stick to it like their life depends on it. The lore of Kite Man's life, or Charles Brown's life, is also just really interesting in the comics. The guy designed the Joker-mobile, for crying out loud. There was this moment when the Riddler and the Joker were fighting over the right to kill Batman, so civilized. Batman contacted Brown to act as his eyes and ears in the villain feud because Brown already had a connection to the Joker since he designed his car. Brown agreed to help out the Bat, but unfortunately the Riddler found out about it and proceeded to respond in quite possibly the most unhinged manner possible, creating one of the funniest villains in the process. Brown's son went out to fly his kite, and that was the last thing he would ever do. He did not know the Riddler poisoned the kite's string. This tragedy with the kite created Kite Man, but Kite Man blamed Batman for getting him into the mess and became a villain for real. The Harley Quinn show gave us so much, not just Kite Man's popularity, but also the engagement of quite the pair of villains, Clock King and the Riddler. The writers were just out here doing whatever they wanted, and I love that for them. In the Harley Quinn TV show episode Harley Quinn, a very problematic Valentine's Day special, we see the proposal. It's very romantic, a heart up in the night sky, and the billboards in the main city square are filled with question marks, and Clock King, will you marry me? Perfect, no notes, I love it when people have fun. It's hard to believe, but Wonder Woman once lost her title. The 90s were the era of experimentation. No one, no matter how loved or established you were, was safe. The 90s robbed Wonder Woman of the name Wonder Woman. She was replaced by Artemis, an Amazon warrior. Though she lost her name, they could not take her spirit, and she continued fighting crime. Now the second half of this, she got a new outfit for fighting crime, and lots of people hated it, including some DC artists. The main critique of it was that it was just too far off from her usual iconic look. She was basically unrecognizable. She looks great, but not like the Diana everyone knows. Thankfully, by the end of the storyline that featured biker Diana, she was back as Wonder Woman. People hated it that much. Moving into a different animated universe and villainification of James Gordon, the beloved police chief. Batman Gotham by Gaslight was an animated movie released by Warner Bros. It was for adults as it handled some adult themes. Jack the Ripper targeted a very specific type of person. So in the world of this movie, Gotham exists when the actual Jack the Ripper did, the Victorian era. Batman in this world is trying to figure out the identity of Jack the Ripper along with the police chief James Gordon. Imagine my shock and surprise to learn that Jack was James the whole time. Turns out James's time in the Civil War messed with him mentally, and he claimed his work was holy. Thou shalt not kill does not exist here, I guess. James claimed that he was just clearing the world of filth, in his words. He gets cleared by Batman and a collapsed Ferris wheel. Wild but fun story. I wouldn't have ever thought to make Police Chief James Gordon a notorious London criminal, but it served. Character deaths can be pretty unexpected depending on the person, but no death made my jaw drop quite the way Snowflame's third one did. Not his first or his second, his third. I mean, the entire character is wild. He is literally a villain that gets his power from a super substance that shares the same name with Coca-Cola. What is that? Who comes up with that? Anyway, the villain is featured as a main antagonist in Peacemaker Tries Hard 4. That series is known to be a little silly, and yet I still never would have guessed how Snowflame was going to be defeated. So Snowflame captures Peacemaker and also Red Bee. He's got them tied up, but they escape. Snowflame heads to a table with a mountain of the snow to recharge himself for battle. Things aren't looking good for the hero. Snowflame is seriously powerful, but the next time Snowflame goes to recharge is where the tide turns, in the wildest of ways. Instead of getting snow in his nose, he gets an entire poison dart frog. Literally, what is happening? Never ever would I have guessed how that fight was going to end. Goodbye, Snowflame. You will not be missed. Alfred, Batman's trusted butler and low-key father figure, his villain arc had me on the edge of my seat. This man deserves nothing but good. Imagine having to corral Bruce Wayne and you get repaid by getting smashed by a boulder. Leave the man alone. The boulder was the start of his villain arc. Alfred literally did not choose the villain life chose him. After getting hit by a boulder, he was kidnapped, and if that wasn't bad enough, the people that kidnapped him experimented on his body and then brought him back to life like he was Frankenstein's monster, and all that monster wanted to do was off his family. Poor Alfred, I could not imagine a worse fate. The reason he hates his family, Batman and Robin, so much is because the experiment on his brain essentially reversed everything. So all the love was transformed into hate, and he became the outsider. Thankfully, Batman loves Alfred and is a rich genius, so he funded the research to get Alfred cured. He got 50% cured, the outsider still lives inside him, but rarely emerges. He does, but rarely. Still, the sweet butler becoming a Batman-hating villain was never on my bingo card. I know we don't like remembering Superman Blue and Red, but we must. This storyline was controversial among fans, most hated it, and that is so fair. Superman is one DC character that has been around forever, so most people know what's up with the Man of Steel. Worlds were rocked with the 1998 version of Superman Red and Superman Blue. Superman temporarily lost his regular powers and developed energy-based powers, and then to top it all off, he split into two different supers. Blue was the more intellectual of the pair, and Red was more act now, waste time thinking later. The two supers did not see eye to eye, and at a certain point flat out refused to join back into one person. Unfortunately for the characters, that was the only thing fans wanted, and soon they were pushed back together into one hero. The reason given in the comic was that Superman was able to return to normal when the electromagnetic energy dispersed. Batman is strong and powerful and rich, but that doesn't change the fact that he's just a guy with a regular skeleton, a regular spine that can be broken. Batman did have his back literally snapped by Bane. It was awful. Batman, even though he was just a regular human and got hurt plenty of times, he always seemed so powerful, like he could bounce back from anything. So breaking his back was a moment that became very iconic after it happened. The Nightfall arc of the early 1990s featured Bane truly trying his hardest to destroy Batman in every aspect he could. There was a major battle between Bane and Batman that left Batman worse for wear until it ended with Bane grabbing Batman and causing that serious act of harm, and then to top it off, he tossed the bat from the rooftop, but he couldn't fly, so it ended bad. Batman had no choice but to get out of the game for a while and have someone take up his mantle. That person was Jean-Paul Valley. Valley did good at first, but he was known for being violent and soon started breaking Batman's no-ending life rule, and that damaged Batman's reputation with James Gordon, the police, the public. It was a mess. Thankfully, Bruce is able to get back on his feet and heal up to defeat Valley, and the actual good Batman is back and better than ever, but this was probably the toughest era for Bruce Wayne. Tony Stark was adopted. Surprise, starting off with a bang. This shocking news was revealed in 2012's Iron Man 17. We also learned that Tony had a brother, as if he didn't have enough on his plate already. Tony and his relationship with his dad has never been stellar, but the news that he was adopted made the genius reevaluate everything he ever knew. Tony's brother is Arno. When Maria Stark was pregnant, Arno wasn't doing well, so the Starks did the normal thing here and accepted help from Alien 451. The help in question: get Arno to term, but in exchange he would genetically modify the baby to be able to one day wield the most powerful armor in the universe. Either way, the Stark boys ended up wielding powerful suits of armor. Howard Stark made his own modifications to Arno while he was in the womb, and those actually made his health decline. Alien 451 could not know that happened, so the Starks adopted Tony as a cover. That is so sad. Tony deserved a loving family, not being a cover-up story for an alien. Arno was kept away, and Tony was eventually brought up in the spotlight. Eventually, Tony and the alien met up, and Tony was in this powerful suit, but it obviously didn't work. Tony had to investigate why. He's Tony Stark, and that's why he found out about his brother. Coming to terms with an island being a sentient mutant is already a big ask, but having said sentient mutant island get a girlfriend, it's borderline too much. Strap in everybody, this is about to get wild. So Krakoa, the now now safe haven for mutants, got a girlfriend, Arakko, also a sentient island. Here's the thing though, Krakoa and Arakko used to be one human-shaped mutant called Akara. Akara eventually grew to the size of a massive island and then was split in half by the Twilight Sword. When that happened, a portal opened to Amenth, a place full of demons and bad things. One half of the island went there, Arakko, and the other half of the island stayed on Earth, Krakoa. They were separated for a long time. Then, Summoner was coming to Earth for a mission, but needed a piece of his realm as a transport, so he took part of the Arakko island, called it the Arak Coral. It was the Arak Coral that presumably mated with Krakoa. The entire island of Arakko stayed separate from Krakoa in the end, it was just the small piece that got involved. The most unexpected love story I have ever read. Wolverine being at point zero for the bombing of Hiroshima still shocks me. At this point, Wolverine is more important in the history of the human race than any major world leader. If you look at the background of any major event in recent history, Wolverine probably has something to do with it. What do you mean he was at the bombing of Hiroshima, and what do you mean he survived? Healing factor goes crazy. How did Wolverine end up at the location of the drop? Well, it was World War II, and Wolverine was captured by some Japanese soldiers and sent to jail. He escapes jail with this guy, Ethan Warren. He is a problem, we will cover that in a second. Wolverine gets romantically involved with a local girl after escaping, and he experiences peace for a short while, until Warren shows up and wrecks everything! He ends Wolverine's girlfriend, and Wolverine starts to fight him. It's a pretty intense fight that would need something pretty serious to stop it. Imagine my shock and surprise when that something was the bomb. Obviously, the city is destroyed, the fight is over, and the comic ends with Wolverine emerging from the wreckage, looking surprisingly not the worst he's looked, but it's in the top 5. Captain America joining the Avengers after being trapped in the ice feels like such an important part of the character's story. It's hard to believe that it was once a surprise. The character went into the ice in 1945 and was revived in 1964, but the comics featuring the Captain continued to be published in the 1950s, so what's going on? This was explained away in 1977 by another person taking over the Captain America mantle to keep the spirit of America alive. That person was William Nasland. All the Captain America stuff that happened when Steve was in the ice still happened, it was just this different guy, so Marvel successfully explained why they could bring Steve back in 1964's Avengers 4, and it would all still make sense in the timeline. According to the Avengers 4 comic, Steve Rogers was brought back because of fan mail. An avalanche of it demanded he return, so thank you to those fans. Marvel would not be Marvel without Steve Rogers. Peter Parker's parents being out of the picture is very central to his character, but one time they returned, and if that wasn't surprising enough, it was revealed that they weren't actually his parents, they were robot versions of his parents. It was the 90s, and that's all the explanation I will give. Moving on, I'm kidding. So, Amazing Spider-Man issue 365, Peter's parents. They are back in business. Welcome back, Richard and Mary Parker. No warning, no call to say they are dropping in, they just show up after resting peacefully for decades worth of comics. Turns out though, they weren't really Peter's parents, but robot versions of them. That was revealed 2 years after the parents were reintroduced, so Marvel kept this up for a while. The robots were sent by a villain named Chameleon because he wanted to figure out who Spider-Man was, and he figured that since Peter Parker gets all the best pictures of the web-slinger, he must know him personally. He was right. A wild plan, but at least he was right. The parents' robots had all the memories from the real Parkers and could simulate humans' emotions, and that programming led to Chameleon's downfall. He did too good of a job because Robot Mary actually started feeling motherly affection towards Peter and ended up protecting him and his identity in the end. Remember that time that Jean Grey died but actually didn't die and was really preserved at the bottom of the ocean by the Phoenix Force? Wasn't that wild? Now this is just part of the history, part of the Marvel lore, but put yourself in the shoes of a reader from this time. This was big news. Jean Grey had sacrificed herself to stop the Dark Phoenix from returning. It was big, it was emotional, she literally passed away. She was going to stay 6 feet under, but then Marvel wanted her back to join a team of X-Men because they needed a girl on the team. Originally, that girl was going to be Dazzler, but that fell through and they wanted Grey instead. So now, instead of being 6 feet under, Grey was actually about 50 feet under the water in Jamaica Bay, kept perfectly safe from harm for all these years by the Phoenix Force so that it could have a proper host. Surprise! Then it was a surprise squared because Madeline Pryor also existed, and she was a clone of Jean involved with Cyclops. Then when the real Jean showed up, Cyclops left her and that made him look really bad. sad. It's hard to picture the Marvel Universe without Jean Grey, but this comeback did rock the boat in the 1980s. Franklin Richards not being a mutant anymore? What was that for? Just to make us suffer? Franklin is the son of Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman, and for a very long time he was a mutant. Not just any mutant, he was thought to be one of the most powerful mutants in the Marvel Universe. That's a big deal, and it's been that way since the kid was a toddler and saving the world. Everybody wanted Franklin on their side. I cannot blame them. The X-Men wanted Franklin on Krakoa. It makes sense. He was an incredibly powerful mutant, and they believed he should be around other people like him. Only his parents disagreed. They believed that since he was a child, he should be home with his family. I see both sides here, but the X-Men and the Fantastic Four got into a pretty big fight over it in Washington Square Park. People's cars were smashed, insurance was called. In this fight, we find out that Mr. Fantastic muted his son's mutanthood so that he couldn't cross into Krakoa, which permanently damaged that relationship. Then, when Franklin did end up on Krakoa after a number of fights with his parents, he made a bunch of friends and kind of started making a life for himself there, but surprise, LOL, it was for nothing. All those relationships and family drama and smashed parks for nothing. It was explained away by Franklin having powers so powerful that he was unconsciously making it appear he was a mutant, but when he lost his powers he couldn't do that anymore and the truth was revealed he wasn't. Imagine that being your teen years. It's a good thing the Fantastics are rich because they are going to need an amazing therapist to help Franklin with all this. Spider-Man and Mary Jane's forceful divorce was so out of left field it still rocks me to my core. So in Spider-Man One More Day, Aunt May is really sick, bedridden, and the possibility of a funeral in the near future is high, so Peter is desperate to help her get better. Peter being unwilling to let go of the woman who took him in and raised him is not that surprising. That's a very normal feeling. It's the way Aunt May was saved. Instead of having a really interesting arc about Peter learning to deal with the grief of losing this important family member, Marvel went with the choice that Mephisto, who is not the devil, but that's the vibe, that Mephisto would save Aunt May in exchange for Peter and MJ's marriage. Bonkers choice. Turns out that there was probably an actual reason for doing this. It wasn't as random as it first appeared. Mephisto had a vision that Spider-Man's daughter was going to take him down in the future, so he figured that if he broke up Peter and MJ's marriage, the daughter would never be born and he would be fine. Good logic. Didn't work though. Another reason why this choice was made, to let writers explore Peter's character without having MJ there. The two have been together for a while, so doing this let the writers explore different stories that they might not have been able to if they were still married. Wanda and Pietro not being mutants and not being Magneto's kids. This topic has been brought up so many times on this channel, I almost want to do an official count, but literally, can you blame us? What was Marvel thinking? This is the kind of thing that you block someone for. For years, decades, Wanda and Pietro have been mutants and the twins of Magneto. Then one day, Uncanny Avengers Volume 2 drops and the Marvel Universe has never been the same. Wanda and Pietro are not mutants all of a sudden, and instead were twins stolen from the Maximoffs to be experimented on by the High Evolutionary, and that is why they have superpowers. That brings in the other big sore spot. If they were stolen twins from the Maximoff, then they aren't Magneto's kids. Marvel just broke up a family that has been around forever. Luckily, they did acknowledge the years of history by showing that even if Magneto isn't their biological dad, he will always be a father figure to them, so thank you for kissing that paper cut, Marvel. Still, it creates some plot holes, we know Magneto has twins because they were born, we saw it, so where are they? Magneto is one of the most powerful mutants out there, so his kids would probably be pretty powerful too. Are we to believe that they haven't been out wreaking havoc somewhere? Also, Magneto found one of his other kids when she used her magnetism powers and he sensed it, so were the actual twins born powerless? Is Marvel keeping this purposely in the dark so they can retcon this retcon? I wish I knew. This single panel of Captain America rocked the internet in a way I have not seen in all my years. The only reason this point beat out the Wanda and Pietro not mutants point was because I feel like it didn't just mean something to only Marvel fans, but also just the general public. Everybody was talking about this, Twitter was having a meltdown. The America-loving king that Chris Evans brought to the screen suddenly saying, "Hail Hydra?" Worlds were changed, breakdowns were had. Now we know that it wasn't actually Steve Rogers Captain America, but a different Captain America raised in a different timeline, Flag Smasher. So we don't need to worry anymore, but when this dropped, I remember where I was. No one saw it coming because it completely goes against everything Captain America. It was truly the most out of character and out of pocket thing Cap could have said. Why in a million years would fans expect this? Bad stuff did still happen in the Hail Hydra universe. Spoiler alert, death of Agent Coulson was a hit to the heart. Deadpool getting roped in because of his blind alliance to the Captain. Messy, messy, messy. Eventually, the actual Captain comes back and takes care of business. Thank goodness.
This moment right here was why I originally didn't like Nightwing. That's right. Me, now one of the biggest Nightwing fans of all time. There was a moment where I really hated Nightwing, and this story was pretty much the main reason. Not only does it have one of the worst moments for Nightwing in terms of romance ever, but he also has some really weird looking faces in this issue, I'm just gonna be honest. We're talking about the disaster that was Nightwing Annual Issue number 2 from 1996. In it, Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon go on a trip down memory lane, and we see the ups of their relationship, as well as some of the really awkward moments and some of the worst of their relationship, the very, very low lows. As we learn that Dick Grayson cheated on his fiancée at the time, Starfire, with Barbara Gordon. Yeah, apparently that happened. Oh my gosh. The night he came to give her an engagement announcement as well. Ouch. Granted, I could actually see Starfire maybe being fine with this interaction, considering how she is sometimes depicted as having a free-loving, almost polyamorous approach to romance, so she may have even known about it and been able to turn the other cheek, but Babs and I think Dick were both actually not fine in regards to what happened between them here. I don't mind the infidelity angle so much, honestly, because you know, that's life and those things do sometimes happen, but it's just so dramatic with Dick coming to see how Babs is, but also delivering an engagement notice. That was part of why he visited, and it seems like something neither of them would ever be able to get past, kind of because of that addition to this moment. And it really paints Dick in a bad light here. With the positive note the actual issue ends on feeling somewhat out of place here as well between them. They try to make it like positive at the end, but you're just like, wow, there was a lot of character assassination in that issue. Are there any moments that you have felt like characters like Nightwing were just completely ruined for you because of something that happened in the comics? Let me know in the comments, because yeah, this was one of those for me. It took me a long time to heal past this. Honestly, this next one is not really so much a moment as it is a whole series. It's a really long moment. It made some strange calls considering what we know of the Female Furies lore. Yes, the Female Furies are Darkseid's elite force of female warriors, but this is Apocalypse, a place where women have honestly always kind of had power. We've been cool with that. Before Darkseid rose to power, his mother, Queen Hegra, ruled the planet, and I know he had a complicated relationship with her, but still, she did rule the planet. Him having his Furies also shows that Darkseid himself acknowledges that women can be powerful and incredibly dangerous. Perhaps that is why he has an elite force of them, and that's the whole point of that. Yet, this series would suggest otherwise for some reason. It's about the struggle of women on Apocalypse, especially the Female Furies, and shows how they're used and abused by Darkseid and just the planet in general, how the political structure is a mess and it's really sexist. Darkseid here also forces himself on Granny Goodness even. For some reason, I don't even know why that happens. Like, I understand the story that they were trying to tell here. In fact, I even admire the idea of this story, that doesn't bother me, but it's just the worst possible setting and with the oddest possible characters to use as a vehicle for the story. Like, it doesn't really make sense given what you know of Darkseid and Apocalypse. Speaking of weird series, to be honest, the Heroes 2021 series event and story wasn't really offensive to me or anything like that. It's no the Female Fury series. Like, I don't have an epic rant for this one. I just found it kind of meh, especially for the story that I was promised. We were promised a story that would change Marvel forever, a new, more gritty world where there were no Avengers, but instead only the Squadron Supreme. We're basically like the Justice League. And what we got instead was something that felt very self-contained to a pocket of the Marvel Universe. Really, the main event book mostly. Well, everything else kind of just continued on outside of this alternate timeline / reality. I'm currently going back and reading the House of M event in full as part of my comic book club that I lead elsewhere, and when it comes to House of M, this is the thing. It was really the first event to do something as big as what Heroes Reborn is attempting to do here. 2021 Heroes Reborn, that is. House of M is a whole new reality that feels like it's taking over the entire universe of Marvel, and even could be the new status quo. Like, when you were reading this, you were probably like, I don't know, are they ever gonna go back? Is this the new reality? House of M is an example, possibly the example, of how you do something like this right, which granted makes sense considering it was the first thing to really do this as big and do this as well. 2021 Heroes Reborn was a mere shadow in comparison, and that's why it fell flat for me. Oh, where to start with this next one? It's been a while since I've needed to give up following along with something, and despite my enjoyment of the Spider-Man Beyond event and the other works of Zeb Wells, honestly I have nothing personal against Zeb Wells, I could not bring myself to continue with Dark Web. I really wanted to like it. People sometimes ask me, Amanda, are there any comics that you had to quit? And it's a rare thing for me, to be honest. I don't usually drop series, I try to see them through. But this is one of those rare instances where an event, a story just lost me. So what's wrong with Dark Web? Well, maybe it's that I was so immersed in everything that had been happening with Madeline Pryor in the lead up to this event, the Goblin Queen, or it could be that Ben Reilly had become a villain again, returning as Chasm following his demise at the end of Beyond, which kinda irked me, I'm gonna be honest. But really, I think it was a combination of both and some of the writing for this event. Now, not all of it, there were some fun moments, and it gave us Rec Rap, who I love, but most of what I read I just wasn't a fan of. The reactions and events just felt out of character for some of the main players here, and I couldn't get past that. I really wanted to like Dark Web, I was really excited for it, but ultimately it didn't live up to the hype for me and went in too many confusing directions that I didn't feel were warranted. I'm okay with Maddie being a villain and getting closure for old wounds. I actually really love Madeline Pryor as a villain, but not when she was in the midst of proving that she had already healed and was ready to move forward with her life, which was happening in New Mutants, so it just feels disjointed. Here's the thing, there are so many people out there who simply put love Kyle Rayner, and so to see him get some major love and respect and come into his power following the events and during the events of Blackest Night was kind of amazing for fans. For most fans of anyone besides Hal Jordan's Green Lantern, there are many times when it feels like their favorite member of the Green Lantern Corps get shafted. I constantly feel this with my favorites especially. See if you can guess who my favorite Green Lantern members are in the comments below, and feel free to share yours with me as well down there. When it comes to Kyle Rayner, his major power boost as he moved from a Green Lantern to White Lantern was deeply admired and appreciated by those who saw Kyle as one of their favorites, especially when we consider how he became Ion and then he went back down. This was like once again another cool power boost for him. To see him lose this power later, not even really in a fight, but instead kind of just him like giving it up voluntarily, it was pretty disappointing. I mean, I know he couldn't have kept the power forever because he would just be too powerful in regards to the DC universe, but it did feel like there was so much more good he could have done with it before giving it up. And I think with Kyle, a lot of the issues that we have is like they try to boost him and then they almost immediately like rescind it. It just doesn't last long enough. Oh, okay, back to Spider-Man. I hate to go back, but we gotta go back. Another thing about what's going on with Spider-Man, and more specifically with Mary Jane and Peter in that world of comics, is, well, this. Mary Jane has powers right now, and I'm a big MJ fan, so you might be thinking, but Amanda, isn't that cool? Don't you love that for MJ? She gets to be a superhero, how cool is that? And the answer to that question is, you know, unless she's part of a Spider Family group, kinda not a big fan of her having powers. Might be a hot take. I mean, I just don't think she needs them to be cool, basically. But it's also more than that for me. Mary Jane's powers here are chance-based, like pulling on a slot machine. She doesn't know what she will get when she activates them, which is why she's taken up the mantle of jackpot. You just got hit by the jackpot. If you know the comic book history of the character Jackpot, this is a completely different character who also was initially thought to be MJ because she looked just like her, but she wasn't. So this is also just a weird and confusing bit of lore that almost feels like a retcon, though it really isn't a retcon. It's weirdly messy to me as someone who associates the name of Jackpot now with Alana Jobson, which already was a weird story to begin with, and the fact that they made her look exactly like MJ. Like, why they always gotta make all these redheads like look almost identical? It's weird. People mention it in the comics and I'm like, okay, not all redheads look the same, I don't think. Do we? I was never a big fan of Donna Troy's beau, Terry Long. He always kind of struck me just as a creep. So when against all odds she was allowed to tie the knot with him, especially considering how many other longtime couples were and are to this day refused to have this luxury in comics, it rubbed me the wrong way. The only good news is that it seems DC Comics woke up to how weird this relationship was, eventually ending the marriage between Terry and Donna, but then they also took it a bit too far, I think, by disposing of Terry and their son together, Robert, in a car accident. I don't know if they needed to do that. That was like extra. I'm sorry to harp on Spider-Man like this. I am, but we're going back there. I want to like Spider-Man. I do like Spider-Man, but these are just some things I'm not vibing with right now in that comic and in that series. And one of them that bothers me even more than Jackpot is Paul. Who is Paul? Peter's new arch nemesis, as he's Mary Jane's new romantic partner, her supposed husband? Right around a time too where it seemed like things were going well and where Peter and MJ might even end up married again. Like the Spencer run, that was the thing that I felt we were left with that was like a little gift, like you could make this happen, and then it instantly gets shattered. Why? One of the worst moments for me recently was in the latest Hellfire Gala, the last Hellfire Gala. I knew it was coming, I knew it had to happen, but it doesn't mean that it hurt me any less. It was especially brutal for me as at the time that I had bought my issue of Hellfire Gala, I saw there was a variant with Dazzler on the cover. If you've been here for a while, you might know that Dazzler is one of my favorite mutants and honestly one of my favorite characters in all of comics. She was on the cover because she was actually announced as part of the new X-Men roster, which was being revealed in this issue and was something I was really excited about. So I think you can understand how upset I was when I learned that the whole X-Men team is almost all killed off after immediately being revealed in this issue. Like immediately, like next page. Dead. No! Aricia Rab actually is one of those heroes who I'd love to see more of in the comics, despite this terrible storyline that involves her, which I'm going to tell you about. Yep, we're going there, and we're talking about the time that Aricia revealed that she was in love with Green Lantern. Fortunately, this happened in what is now considered to be a previous continuity, but still, it happened. Why was this so disappointing? Because at the time, Hal Jordan's Green Lantern was like an older brother to the much younger Aricia. Aricia's willpower for wanting to be with Hal, however, was so strong that she was able to use her power ring to prematurely age herself up, or at least make herself appear aged up, and as a result, the two were then free to be in a relationship together. At least that's how they saw it. It's a bizarre turn of events, especially when you consider how adamant Hal was initially that Aricia's feelings for him were not to be indulged because he just felt that that was wrong. So in the end, he felt it was wrong, he knew it was wrong, but he did it anyway. What?
Coming in at number 10, Hello! In the very first issue of his self-titled magazine, Spider-Man is putting other heroes to shame. Spider-Man infiltrates the Baxter Building and faces the Fantastic Four, Marvel's most popular family and one of their top-selling teams at the time. Now Spider-Man finds himself encased in a plexiglass cage that he very easily just opens the door to. He then takes a single punch from the Thing before he throws Ben Grimm into Johnny Storm. Now when Reed tries to catch Peter, he totally dodges it and webs up Mr. Fantastic's hands. He uses his spider sense to detect Sue Storm while she's invisible and spins her around really fast with her own lasso. But then Johnny Storm gets him in a circle of flame. How will he ever escape? He says, and I quote, "Well, I'll just jump over that clown's little trap." And that's exactly what he does. The whole altercation is honestly a pretty impressive display, and it happened in no less than 1.5 pages. The fight ends when Spider-Man lets him know that he's there to join up with the Fantastic Four and that little fight was just a display of what he can do. Yeah, that little display is probably way better than a resume. Number 9, Firelord. In The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 270, a black-suited Spider-Man puts one hell of a beating on a former Herald of Galactus, Firelord. Now previously, Firelord had been wandering the cosmos when he stopped into New York to enjoy the culture, only to be attacked by firemen because he's on fire. And then he got kicked in the face by Spider-Man. Now, the Lord of Fire wants his revenge. After leading Firelord on a very crazy chase through office buildings, Grand Central Station, the subway system, into a construction zone, and having a building demolished on top of the fiery villain, and then leading him to a gas station which then explodes, Spider-Man is at his wit's end. Understandably so. He musters up all of his effort and his spider sense to lay an incredible beatdown of speed, agility, and raw strength on Firelord, getting kind of lost in his own bloodlust until Captain America and the Avengers show up to be like, chill. And he does. Number 8. Morlun and the Inheritors. When Marvel brought on writer J. Michael Straczynski as the writer of Amazing Spider-Man, I don't think anyone realized that it would lead to some of the most controversial moments of the wall crawler's history. One of these moments was the idea that the radioactive science fiction spider which bit Peter Parker in the first place was apparently now the emissary of a mystical spider god, making Spider-Man no longer simply a sci-fi hero, but also a supernatural one. This meant that he needed supernatural enemies to counter that as well. So, Morlun and the Inheritors entered the scene. Essentially, Morlun is an energy vampire. Morlun and his family feed off energy from animal god avatars called totems, and spider totems, like Spider-Man in particular, are their favorite. Other animal totems would be characters like Black Panther. Now, Morlun hits hard. Despite being defeated a few times by Spider-Man, he always ends up coming back, and one of his fights with Peter was one of the most brutal fights Peter has ever gone through, getting his eye taken out and being subjected to a hospital bed wrapped head to toe in bandages. Number 7. Silk. Cindy Moon, first revealed in The Amazing Spider-Man #1 from 2014, was a girl who, on the same day, was also bitten by the exact same spider that gave Peter Parker his powers. Now fast forward to the 4th issue of that comic, and Peter learns of her existence and the place she was being kept safe from Morlun and the Inheritors, who we just talked about, who would come looking for her if she was ever released. Well, Peter releases her, and joins her as she goes off into the world. Now it took maybe 5 or 6 pages before it was revealed that these two young spider heroes apparently release pheromones that make them irresistibly attracted to one another, and they nearly immediately start just going at it, like mid-argument. They go at it so much that it carries on into the next issue when Peter and Cindy are on the ceiling of the apartment that Peter shares with his roommate, Anna Maria Marconi. So of course, Anna Maria walks in on the two spider freaks, sparsely clothed, on the ceiling and unable to control themselves. It's really weird, but the introduction of Silk was definitely an awesome addition to the Spider-Man mythos. Number 6. Defending New York. After the events of the fight the heroes had against the villain Onslaught, all the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and more were whisked off into a pocket dimension. Now that means that New York, and kind of the world, lost its main defenders. But Spider-Man was there to step in. Now to be fair, this was the clone of Peter Parker, Ben Reilly, but he holds the same morals and the exact same powers, and he was Spider-Man for a time, so I'm just gonna give this one to. Spider-Man by himself stepped into the role of the Avengers. One guy filled the role of a whole team, defending New York from all supercrime and keeping the people of New York in remembrance of the seemingly gone forever superheroes. And you know what? It's just what Spider-Man would do. He would step up when things looked their bleakest and take the heavy weight of being solely responsible for defending the world. The man took on an invasion of Sentinels. Sure, there were other non-active Avengers on the Earth still, and while they were considering coming back as a team, Spider-Man just went out and did it, and he did it solo. Way to go, Tiger. Number 5. The Enigma Force. Now, in terms of raw power, Spider-Man stands absolutely no chance against the Incredible Hulk. I think his spider sense may help him out in some kind of way, but there is no way that he's lasting long in that fight, unless he gets a power boost in the form of the Enigma Force, turning him into Captain Universe. That's exactly what happened in The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 328. The Grey Hulk, who, yes, is a bit weaker and logical compared to his Savage Hulk counterpart, is hired by Sebastian Shaw to target Spider-Man. Unfortunately for Hulk, Spider-Man has been going to the cosmic gym and hitting the cosmic weights, and he lands some pretty heavy blows on the Grey Goliath and even blinds him with a new I-beam power. When some kids are put in danger though, Spider-Man ends the conflict quick by punching the Hulk all the way into orbit and then flying up and saving him before he suffocates in space. Then Spider-Man just stands all confident with his hands on his hips, looking super confident and heroic and everything. Very cool. Number 4. Buying time. I love when Spider-Man gets to show how smart he actually is. In Big Time, The Amazing Spider-Man, the new Sinister Six has activated big boomies all over New York City, and the Avengers are struggling with how to disarm and deactivate them in the 2 minutes and 28 seconds that they have left to do so. Reed Richards and Tony Stark, two of the smartest men on the whole planet in Marvel Comics, were going over options on how to disarm the things. Freeze the thermal assembly? That ain't gonna work. Use a sliver of vibranium? Maybe, but that won't do it either. While they were all slowly starting to accept this mission as a failure, Spider-Man figured it out. After taking a look at the clock, Peter rushes over to the computer, running the device, and begins to sync up the timer with the system clock. Why the heck would he do that? Well, you see, it just happened to be the very first Sunday in November, which means daylight savings time, which means Peter just bought them an extra hour to get rid of the devices. Number 3, Kraven's Last Hunt. This is more of a Kraven the Hunter moment than it is a Spider-Man moment, but he's a Spider-Man villain and it happened in Spider-Man's comic, so we're gonna go with it. Kraven's Last Hunt finally sees the Hunter get the drop on Spider-Man. Sticking Spidey in the neck with a dart and then burying Spider-Man 6 feet under, Kraven actually beat his adversary. Thinking Peter Parker is down and out, Kraven then takes on Spider-Man's costume, or a copy of the black Spider-Man costume, and he hunts down criminals in an attempt to prove to himself that he's better than Spider-Man. Unfortunately, the whole thing still ends in tragedy for Kraven the Hunter. Spider-Man actually survives his ordeal with Kraven, digs himself out of his own grave, and renders Kraven's victory moot. But Kraven had still accomplished his main goal technically by besting Spider-Man. So now, convincing himself that he has no reason to live anymore because he did his main thing and now he's here, Kraven chooses to defeat himself permanently. Number 2, Superior Spider-Man. Dr. Octopus is one Spider-Man villain that has a very serious claim at being the primary adversary to Peter Parker. He has consistently given Spider-Man enough grief to cause wrinkles, but then Otto is also one of the few villains to absolutely defeat his hero, just like Kraven, sort of. When Otto was beginning to lose his life, he managed to find a way to transfer his consciousness into the body of Peter Parker while transferring Peter's consciousness into his own failing body. Peter ended up completely passing away, at least temporarily, inside the body of his adversary, while Otto gained an incredibly powerful body and a new slightly heroic personality, becoming the Superior Spider-Man. But Spider-Ock, or Spock as people do call him, I'll have you know, changes things. He took his genius and experience and applied it, making an awesome new suit, spider bots, and mechanical arms. He also straight up took villains to their graves and even single-handedly defeated the Sinister Six, taking the Living Brain as a trophy. He completely dumps MJ, but starts a relationship with Anna Maria Marconi, who became a popular addition to the Spider-Man canon. He purged Charlie Cooper of the Goblin Serum, helped Aunt May walk again, got Peter his PhD, mainly for clout, and built a scientific empire that would make Peter a multi-billionaire. He made himself a much more efficient hero, and it was a crazy time. And finally, in at number 1 today, it's Gwen Stacy. June in 1973's The Amazing Spider-Man number 121 is one of the most famous comic books ever. This is the comic that contains the moment when the Green Goblin, in an attempt to rid Spider-Man from his life, threatened to end the life of Peter's longtime girlfriend, Gwen Stacy. When the fight started, Peter was able to push Goblin off long enough to make it to Gwen right at the tippy top of one of the towers of the George Washington Bridge. Unfortunately, Goblin's glider did its thing and Goblin flew up and pushed Gwen off of the bridge. Peter used his webs to try and stop her fall, webbing up her legs and catching her. What he actually failed to realize at first is that moving that fast and stopping so suddenly and abruptly is not good for the human body, and Peter's webs had actually snapped her neck thanks to the whiplash. This was a truly massive moment, not just for Peter Parker, but for comics in general, as major characters passing away was basically non-existent. It left fans stunned and cemented Green Goblin as one of the most dastardly bad guys out there for anyone, but specifically for Spider-Man.
At number 10 is X-Men versus the Sentinels. Now, typically the X-Men can make quick work of the Sentinels, but not in this case, because this particular Sentinel seems to be about as OP as the Marvel vs. Capcom character. The X-Men had one heck of a showdown against these Sentinels in Uncanny X-Men number 142. The dystopian future where these massive, terrifying Sentinels wreak havoc. It's like the end of the line for the X-Men, as these villains are that intense. What really hits hard is when one of these guys takes out Wolverine with this insane energy blast. I mean, Brutal doesn't even cover it, as Wolverine's flesh is just seared clean off his skin. It's like a major gut punch for the whole team and fans too. And get this whole Stark future hinges on the demise of a single US senator. But hold up, here's the kicker. Kitty Pryde then swoops in and does that time traveling stuff, stopping that senator's assassination, and that move might have just saved the day and changed everything. At number 9 is Cyclops versus Wolverine. Cyclops and Wolverine are two big big names in the X-Men world, and they clashed in a very brutal showdown. It wasn't just a regular argument either, it was a full-on fight. See, they've always had this tension, especially when it comes to Jean Grey, with that little love triangle there, but things got out of hand in Schism. See, Cyclops with his eye-blasting powers went all out against Wolverine. He didn't hold back firing those optic blasts at him, who in return fought back with everything he had. Now, Cyclops is way more powerful, but Wolverine's ability to heal kept him going. This fight wasn't just about powers, but it was personal. Both dudes were full of rage and super intense. Imagine these two heavy hitters just going at it, not stopping until they were both worn out. One of the moments that make you go, whoa, that really just happened? If you're enjoying the video so far, you could support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Top 10 Nerd, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 is Professor X vs. Magneto. Professor X and Magneto had their fair share of epic clashes, but one particular showdown left jaws on the floor. In X-Men number 25, things got seriously intense, as Magneto had gone on a full rampage, ripping every bit of adamantium off of Wolverine's skeleton. Yeah, all that indestructible stuff, all gone. It almost ended Wolverine and shook the X-Men to their core. But then it gets even more intense, because Magneto just didn't stop there, causing devastation and taking the lives of hundreds of innocent people. And that's when Professor X snapped. In a shocking move, Professor X did the unthinkable, erasing Magneto's mind. Imagine wiping someone's memories clean. That's basically what happened. This clash between the two mutants took a brutal turn, pushing even the most devoted X-Men fans to question the limits of right and wrong in their epic battles. At number 3 is Wolverine vs. Sabretooth. In the world of X-Men, Wolverine and Sabretooth are known for their intense clashes, but their brawl in Wolverine number 10 probably takes the cake. Their rage-fueled showdown kicks off when Wolverine discovers that Sabretooth unalived his beloved Silver Fox. What follows is an all-out war, a brutal melee where both mutants unleash their full ferocity. Wolverine, driven by grief and fury, goes berserk. It's a visceral display of raw power as he tears into Sabretooth with an almost primal intensity. But it doesn't end there. Sabretooth, equally savage, retaliates with a barrage of his own vicious attacks. Now the mind-blowing part is, despite the brutality, both of their mutant healing abilities kept them going. Limbs torn, bodies shredded, but neither of them gave an inch. It was a relentless clash that pushes the boundaries of their endurance, leaving us stunned at the sheer intensity of the battle. And number 6 is Galactus versus Rachel Summers. There's this epic showdown that just kept minds blown in X-Men. Picture this, Rachel Summers goes head to head against Galactus, the ginormic cosmic entity with a serious hunger for planets. Now this clash happens in Excalibur 61, and let me tell you, it's next level. Rachel stumbles upon Galactus as he's gearing up to snack on a planet, and what unfolds is a colossal battle, pun intended, that's both visually stunning and totally out of this world. The artist pulls out all the stops, making each punch, every display of power feel like a seismic event. It's like watching fireworks as Rachel, fueled by the Phoenix Force, takes on this colossal force of nature. The sheer scale of their fight, the raw power on display, is enough to leave you wide-eyed and jaw-dropped. The showdown isn't just brutal, it's a cosmic clash of epic proportions. At number 5 is the Dark Phoenix versus the X-Men. In Uncanny X-Men number 135, things got intense when Jean Grey turned into the Dark Phoenix. She went all out against her own pals, the X-Men. Jean Grey morphs a tree into solid gold, squashing Colossus underneath it, and then turning him back into a regular human. Storm, who usually gives a tough fight, faces brutal psychic attacks from Jean. And the rest of the gang, she tosses them aside as if they're feathers. It's pretty wild because the X-Men, who are usually the team fighting for good, end up facing one of their own at her most powerful and uncontrollable state. This moment shows how even heroes like X-Men deal with some seriously tough challenges, especially when the threat comes from within your own ranks. At number 4, Jean Grey versus Emma Frost. You see, this all started when Jean Grey found out that Emma's been sort of messing around with Scott Summers, who's Jean's partner. Talk about drama. And this isn't your regular superhero fight, it goes way deeper. Jean's anger pushes her to use her psychic powers to delve into Emma's mind, making her relive all of her worst memories, like a mental battlefield way more brutal than just throwing punches. Now this whole clash ripped apart the relationship between Cyclops, Scott, and Jean Grey. Pretty heavy fallout. And it's not just about punches and kicks, it was emotions and consequences that go way beyond the fight itself. And at number 3 is Colossus versus the Marauders. Amidst the chaotic clashes of the X-Men, one gripping moment that stands out is the clash between Colossus Colossus and the Marauders. This event shook the pages of Marvel Comics during the fall of the Mutant Saga. See, the Marauders, fueled by their sheer malice, brought devastation upon innocent Morlocks hiding beneath New York City. The intensity reached its peak in Uncanny X-Men number 211 when Colossus faced off against Riptide, a member of the Marauders. The Marauders' callousness, coupled with their harm to Nightcrawler and Kitty Pryde, pushed Colossus beyond his breaking point. Now, Colossus is usually known for his gentle nature despite his immense strength, but this time he was driven to an unprecedented act, ending Riptide's life. This shocking moment showcased the depths of despair and anger that the X-Men faced in their fight for justice and peace. At number 2 is Wolverine versus the Hellfire Club. In Uncanny X-Men number 133, Wolverine faces off against the Hellfire Club goons in a defining moment for the character. This showdown helped establish Wolverine as a force to be reckoned with. Now, even though this one wasn't as graphic as later battles, it showcased his ruthless nature. Throughout the clash, Wolverine takes down the goons one by one, displaying his sheer ferocity and skill. Each takedown ramps up the tension as the Hellfire Club members witness their comrades failing to Wolverine's relentless attacks. This scene wasn't just about the physical fight, it highlighted Wolverine's reputation as someone not to be trifled with. The intensity of this battle solidified Wolverine's place as one of the most formidable and iconic members of the X-Men. It set the stage for his future confrontations, marking a pivotal moment in the character's history. And coming in at number 1 is Psylocke versus Wolverine. In the world of Marvel Comics, Psylocke and Wolverine had some intense showdowns. Now, one particular brawl in Uncanny X-Men number 258 was a standout. Psylocke, known for her martial arts prowess, showcased her skills against the formidable Wolverine. Now, despite Wolverine's super strength, speed, and adamantium claws, and extensive combat expertise, Psylocke swiftly outmaneuvered him. She executed precise moves that had to leave Wolverine reeling, and then, adding a final blow, she unleashed her Psychic Blade, a powerful weapon unique to the X-Men. Now, this clash wasn't about the physical strength, but also about strategy and Psylocke's exceptional skills. It's a reminder that in the world of mutants, raw power isn't always the deciding factor in a fight. Psylocke's combination of martial arts and psychic prowess made this one of the most memorable, most intense battles in all of X-Men history.